All right, so are you ready to dive deep? Today we're going to tackle OgyMogy monitoring software. You guys have sent us so much information on this.
It seems like we have everything.
Yeah.
From the company's own marketing to
Yeah, some pretty intense user reviews, so
yeah, a full
we've
spectrum.
got a full spectrum of perspectives here.
It's interesting that OgyMogy markets itself as a tool for both parents and employers.
Right.
Those are two groups with very different needs and
Yeah.
potential concerns.
Okay, so let's just start with the basics. What exactly OgyMogy?
Right.
Their website says it's advanced monitoring software for parental control and employee tracking on Android, Windows, and Mac devices. Seems pretty straightforward, right?
Uh-huh.
But then you see the features and
Yeah.
things get a little...
Yeah, it kind of goes beyond your typical parental control app.
Yeah.
And it really blurs the lines when it comes to privacy
Yeah.
and potential for misuse.
So, for example, they have a listen to surroundings feature. Not just location tracking, but
Yeah.
like actual audio recording.
It's important to consider the implications of such comprehensive monitoring.
Right.
Like capturing every click, every scroll, every interaction raises questions about the level of surveillance that we're comfortable with, even in seemingly justified situations.
And if that wasn't enough, there's a keylogger function,
Oh, wow.
which captures every keystroke, including things like passwords and
Right.
private messages.
The keylogger function is particularly interesting because it really delves into the realm of data security. Imagine the sensitivity of the information that's being collected.
Right.
We could be talking financial details, personal conversations, even medical information that someone enters into an online form.
Right.
So where's all this data being stored
Yeah.
and how secure is it?
That's a really good point. It's not just about what's being monitored, but also what happens to that information afterward.
Exactly.
And this leads to another key feature. So OgyMogy can remotely control the device's camera and microphone. So that means that the software can potentially be used to activate these features without the user's knowledge, essentially turning the device into a listening and recording device.
It does raise some unsettling possibilities, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is starting to feel like something out of a spy movie.
It does, right. Imagine the potential for misuse, especially if this software falls into the wrong hands.
Okay, so we've got audio recording, screen recording, key logging, and remote camera and microphone activation.
Uh-huh.
Is there anything OgyMogy doesn't do?
Well, no modern monitoring software would be complete without social media monitoring.
Right.
And OgyMogy certainly delivers on that front. It gives you access to chats, media, and even deleted messages on various platforms.
So even if someone thinks they've deleted something, OgyMogy might still have a copy of it. That seems pretty intense.
It really raises some questions about data retention policies
Yeah.
and the permanence of our digital footprint. Even if you think something is gone, it might still exist on a server somewhere, accessible to someone with the right tools.
This is heavy stuff. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about the two main groups that OgyMogy targets. First, there's digital parenting. So they emphasize preventing cyberbullying and online predators, managing screen time and online activity, and generally ensuring children's safety in the digital world.
Yeah,
These are all valid things that parents worry about, right?
absolutely. And it's understandable that parents want to protect their kids, right?
Yeah.
In the often unpredictable world of the internet. But the question is, do the benefits of such intensive monitoring outweigh the potential downsides? Could it erode trust between parent and child?
Right. It's like how much is too much when it comes to monitoring your kids?
Exactly. It's a very delicate balance between protection and respect for a child's growing autonomy and privacy.
And then there's the second target group, employee monitoring. So OgyMogy talks about measuring productivity, preventing time wasting, protecting company data and intellectual property, and ensuring compliance with company policies. These are all legitimate concerns for employers, especially in today's increasingly digital workplaces.
Yeah, but the depth of intrusion that's offered by OgyMogy requires a very careful consideration of ethical boundaries and legal ramifications.
Absolutely.
So, is it ethical to track every keystroke an employee makes?
Right.
What about recording their conversations or activating their webcam without their knowledge?
Right.
These actions can have a chilling effect on employee morale and create an environment of distrust.
That's a tricky situation, right? Because employers do have a responsibility to protect their business interests.
Right.
But at what point does monitoring cross the line and become overly intrusive?
Yeah, it's a gray area for sure.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that laws vary depending on the location and the specific circumstances. So what might be considered acceptable in one context
Right.
could be illegal in another.
So we've established that OgyMogy is super powerful, targets parents and employers with high-stakes concern. But the big question is, does it actually work as advertised?
That's where things get really interesting, because when we move away from the marketing materials and delve into user experiences,
Yeah.
a more complex picture emerges.
Right. So some users rave about OgyMogy, praising its effectiveness for, monitoring their children's online activity or keeping tabs on employee productivity. But then you have others who paint a very different picture,
Yeah.
reporting glitches, unreliable customer support, and struggles with updates.
And these aren't just like vague complaints either.
Right.
We're seeing very specific issues that are highlighted, like,
Yeah.
for instance, the Snapchat logging feature malfunctioning after an update.
Right.
Or the service experiencing outages that resulted in data loss.
And that's a big red flag, right? If you're relying on this software for sensitive information, but then it's glitchy or the company isn't dependable, that raises serious concerns.
Yeah, it really emphasizes the importance of independent verification
Yeah.
and a healthy dose of skepticism
Right.
when evaluating the claims made by any software company, especially when we're dealing with something as impactful as monitoring software.
Okay, so we've got effectiveness on one side.
Right.
But then there's this huge elephant in the room, legality.
Yeah.
So OgyMogy stresses that it's for legal use only.
Right.
Parental control, employee monitoring on company-owned devices, and so on.
They even specifically state that it cannot be used to track spouses or partners
Oh, really?
without their consent,
Interesting.
which suggests they're at least somewhat aware of the potential for misuse and legal issues.
But even if it's technically legal in a certain situation,
Right.
that doesn't automatically make it ethical.
You're absolutely right. Legality varies widely, depending on the jurisdiction and the specific use case. And even when something is perfectly legal, it doesn't necessarily mean it's ethical. The questions of consent,
Right.
transparency, and the potential impact on trust and relationships are crucial,
Yeah.
regardless of what the law says.
And that's where things get really complicated because we're not just talking about technology anymore.
Yeah.
We're talking about human relationships, power dynamics, and fundamental rights.
This is where you, as the listener, have to start asking yourself some tough questions,
Yeah.
right? Like, what are your own values?
Right.
What are your boundaries?
Yeah.
And how do those align, or perhaps don't align, with the capabilities of a tool like OgyMogy?
So it sounds like we've only just scratched the surface here. We'll be back in part 2 of our deep dive into OgyMogy to tackle some of the trickier aspects of this software. Things like rooting and jailbreaking, compatibility issues, and that big question of privacy.
Until then, I encourage you to really think about what we've discussed today. Like,
Yeah.
what are your initial reactions to OgyMogy's capabilities? What questions are swirling in your mind? Hold on to those thoughts, and we'll see you soon.
Welcome back to our deep dive into OgyMogy. In part 1, we kind of explored the company's claims and the potential impact of its features.
Right.
So now let's get into the technical weeds and see how this software actually works.
Yeah, you're right, because all this monitoring magic has to rely on some serious technical maneuvering.
Right.
One term that keeps popping up in our research is rooting.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that means and why it matters for OgyMogy?
So rooting an Android device basically gives you super user access to the operating system.
So you have full control.
Yeah, think of it like having full control over the phone's software instead of just being like a regular user.
Okay.
And for some of OgyMogy's more advanced features, rooting is absolutely necessary.
So if you want to use, say, the social media monitoring or the keylogger, you have to root the phone first.
Exactly.
Why is that? So without rooting, OgyMogy can only access a limited amount of data.
Okay.
But rooting lets it bypass security restrictions and get deeper into the phone's system.
Okay.
But here's the catch.
Uh-oh.
Rooting a device can be risky.
In what way?
It can void the warranty, make the phone more vulnerable to security threats,
Right.
and even permanently damage the device if it's done incorrectly.
That's a lot to consider.
Yeah.
So, if a parent decides to root their child's phone to install OgyMogy, they're potentially opening up a whole other can of worms
Right.
when it comes to security and functionality.
Exactly. It really highlights the fact that using this type of software
Right.
isn't always simple or straightforward. There are inherent risks involved,
Right.
and users need to be aware of those before proceeding.
And it sounds like there's a similar process for iPhones called jailbreaking, right?
You're right.
So what's the difference between rooting and jailbreaking?
So jailbreaking an iPhone is essentially the iOS equivalent of rooting an Android device. It allows you to bypass Apple's restrictions
Okay.
and install apps that aren't available in the official App Store, including monitoring apps like OgyMogy.
So regardless of whether it's an Android or an iPhone, getting the full suite of OgyMogy features requires taking some pretty significant steps
Yes.
that could potentially compromise the device's security and functionality.
You've hit another, crucial point.
Yeah.
It's not just about installing an app.
Right.
It's about altering the core functionality of the device.
Right.
And those alterations come with potential consequences.
On top of all that, we have to factor in compatibility.
Right.
Our research suggests that OgyMogy isn't compatible with all devices and operating systems.
Yeah, and you've had another crucial point here. So while OgyMogy claims to work with Android, Windows, and Mac, there are specific operating system versions
Right.
and device models that are supported.
Right.
It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
And things get even more complicated when you consider software updates.
Because both operating systems and the OgyMogy app itself are constantly being updated, right?
Yeah.
So what happens if those updates clash?
If the updates aren't in sync, it can cause major problems with functionality.
Okay, so
For example, a user might find that a feature they rely on suddenly stops working,
right.
or the entire app could crash.
And looking at those user reviews, it seems like compatibility issues and problems with updates are some of the most common complaints.
Users report instances where Snapchat logging stopped working after an update, or the entire OgyMogy service went down, leading to data loss.
Right.
So it really emphasizes the importance of considering not just initial compatibility, but also the ongoing maintenance and support provided by the company.
It's starting to feel like a technological tightrope walk here.
Yeah.
Rooting, jailbreaking, compatibility issues, update woes. It's a lot to juggle.
And all of this complexity kind of pales in comparison to, the biggest issue of all.
Which is?
Privacy. We're talking about software that collects a massive amount of personal information.
Right.
So how does OgyMogy handle all that data?
Right.
And what are the privacy implications for the people being monitored?
If you're recording audio, capturing screens, logging keystrokes, and accessing social media activity, that's a treasure trove of sensitive data.
OgyMogy claims they take data security seriously and use encryption to protect user information.
Okay.
But as we know, no system is completely foolproof.
Right. There's always that risk of data breaches, hacks, and leaks.
Exactly.
And even if the company itself is responsible with the data, what about the person who has access to the control panel?
Right.
What's to stop them from misusing that information?
That's a valid concern. Imagine someone using this software to stalk or harass someone.
Right.
Or even to blackmail them with sensitive information.
Right.
And these aren't just hypothetical scenarios. There have been real-world cases where monitoring software has been used for malicious purposes. That's a chilling thought. So even if you believe you have legitimate reasons for using OgyMogy, like keeping your child safe online,
Right.
you can't ignore the potential for misuse both by the company and by individuals.
Exactly. And that's where the ethical considerations we discussed earlier become even more critical.
Yeah.
Even if you trust the company and your intentions are good.
Right.
Is the level of surveillance truly justified? Does the potential benefit outweigh the potential risks to privacy and individual autonomy?
These are tough questions, and it's not just about personal ethics. The legal landscape surrounding monitoring software is a tangled web as well.
What's legal in one country or state might be illegal in another.
Right.
And even within the same jurisdiction, legality often hinges on specific contexts, like parental control, employee monitoring, or other situations. It's rarely a clear-cut issue.
So it's not enough to just assume something is okay because it's marketed as such.
Right.
You really have to dig deep.
Understand the nuances of the law and consider the ethical implications.
I completely agree. And that's why we always encourage our listeners to do their own research.
Yeah.
And consult with legal experts if they have any questions or doubts.
All right. So we've covered a lot of ground here. Rooting, jailbreaking, compatibility issues, update concerns, privacy, legal complexities. It's enough to make your head spin. But before we get completely overwhelmed, let's take a step back and consider the alternatives to OgyMogy. Because let's face it, this software isn't the right solution for everyone.
That's an excellent point. There are other ways to, address the concerns that OgyMogy claims to solve.
Right.
Approaches that might be less intrusive and more aligned with your values.
For example, what are some alternatives for parents who are concerned about their children's online safety?
There are a number of parental control apps out there that take a less invasive approach.
Okay.
These apps might focus on features like filtering content, setting screen time limits,
Okay.
or blocking certain apps and websites. So they offer a way to guide and protect children online without resorting to constant surveillance.
And for employers who want to, boost productivity and security, are there alternatives to constant employee monitoring?
Absolutely. Things like clear communication, strong company policies, and fostering a culture of trust
Right.
can be far more effective in addressing workplace concerns than relying on intrusive monitoring tools.
So before even considering software like OgyMogy, it's crucial to explore these alternatives.
Yes.
And see if there's a less invasive path to achieving your goals.
That brings us to a key takeaway here. Monitoring software like OgyMogy should always be a last resort, not a first option.
Right.
It's not a magic solution.
Right.
And it comes with a whole host of potential problems, as we've discussed. We have to think about the broader societal implications of increasingly powerful monitoring tools. Like, what happens when this technology becomes ubiquitous? How does it affect our relationships,
Right.
our sense of privacy, and our fundamental freedoms?
Those are big questions, and ones that we should all be asking ourselves as we navigate this increasingly digital world. It seems like this is a good place to pause for now.
Indeed. Let's leave our listeners with those thought-provoking questions.
Yeah?
And reconvene in part 3 to wrap up our deep dive into OgyMogy.
Welcome back, deep divers, to the final part of our exploration into OgyMogy monitoring software. We've unpacked the company's claims and dug into user experiences.
We've wrestled with the technical complexities.
Yeah, and confronted some very serious privacy concerns that this type of software raises.
Yeah, now it's time to step back and consider the bigger picture.
Right.
What does OgyMogy tell us about the evolving landscape of technology?
Right.
And the choices we face in a world where these monitoring capabilities are becoming increasingly powerful.
It feels like OgyMogy is like a kind of microcosm of the broader ethical dilemmas surrounding surveillance in the digital age. It offers solutions to, genuine concerns, parents wanting to protect their kids, employers safeguarding their businesses. But those solutions come bundled with some pretty hefty trade-offs.
You're right. The potential cost of those solutions is often measured in privacy, autonomy, and trust.
Right.
And as we've seen, OgyMogy's capabilities go far beyond what many people would consider reasonable or even necessary. It's a tool that can be, easily misused, whether intentionally or unintentionally.
And the thing is, OgyMogy is just one example.
Right.
Among many.
Yeah, there are tons of other monitoring apps out there.
Yeah.
Some even more powerful and invasive.
So it seems like this technology is advancing at an incredible pace.
Yeah.
And the ethical and legal frameworks are really struggling to keep up.
That's exactly the challenge we face. How do we harness the potential benefits of technology? Because there certainly are benefits.
Right.
But how do we harness those without sacrificing our fundamental values? Where do we draw the line between legitimate security needs and unwarranted intrusion into people's lives?
It feels like a question without easy answers, honestly.
It really is.
But maybe by having these conversations, by doing a deep dive into the complexities of a specific case like OgyMogy,
right,
we can at least start to find our way.
Yeah, start to find our way
through this really murky territory.
I agree. These conversations are so crucial, and they need to happen everywhere, within families and workplaces, throughout society as a whole. We really need to talk openly about our expectations, our boundaries, and the kind of future we want to build together.
Because ultimately the technology itself isn't inherently good or bad.
Right.
It's a tool.
It's a tool.
And like any tool, it can be used for positive or negative purposes. So the responsibility really lies with us, the users, to wield these tools thoughtfully and ethically.
And that thoughtfulness has to start with awareness,
Right.
like understanding what these tools are capable of,
Right.
recognizing the potential risks,
Yeah.
considering the ethical implications. These are the essential first steps toward making responsible choices.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into OgyMogy, let's turn it back over to you, the listener. What are your key takeaways from all of this? What questions are still lingering in your mind? And what actions, if any, are you inspired to take based on what we've talked about today?
We encourage you to continue exploring this complex topic.
Yeah.
Talk to your loved ones, research the specific laws in your region, and engage in, thoughtful discussions about the role of technology in our lives. Because the choices that we make about technology today are going to shape the world we all inhabit tomorrow.
It's been a fascinating and at times unsettling journey into the world of monitoring software. But hopefully it's left you feeling more informed and empowered to navigate this evolving landscape.
That's our goal with every deep dive, to give you with the knowledge and insights you need to make informed decisions and engage in these important conversations.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another exploration into the depths of information.